You've gone soft in the head, Reeves. Building a second roof? That's not insulation. It's a hat for a house.
It's a dead air gap. Still air doesn't lose heat. This isn't fashion, Edward. It's physics.
Physics? The only physics I know is wind ripping off that second roof come first storm. You are wasting good lumber.
Joshua steadied the ladder, his face tight with doubt. Word of David's strange project had spread through town.
Mark my words, this air gap will be a wind tunnel. You'll be shivering under a broken roof while we're warm.
Let them laugh. I've known cold deeper than their mockery. This roof will stand.
The town's laughter followed David home that evening, but he didn't look back. Inside his small cabin, David sat alone. The fireplace crackled, but his eyes were fixed on something else.
You taught me, Thomas, even if no one else remembers.
He had learned about still air the hard way, from a winter that stole the only warmth he'd ever known. The next morning, David climbed back onto the ladder. The hammer fell with a rhythm that matched a pulse stopped a long time ago. In his mind, he was still in a freezing room, watching his younger brother Thomas press a blanket against the windowsill.
You can't plug every hole, Davy. The wind always finds a way.
Joshua found him by the ladder, the photograph still tucked inside his coat.
Who was he, David? The one in the picture?
My brother. He didn't survive the winter of '79.
A voice cut through from the road. Edward Harlow, arms crossed, watching from the snow.
Still digging up graves, Reeves. Let the dead stay dead.
I will not let that happen again. Not to anyone.
Without another word, David drove in the final spikes. The second roof stood finished to the air gap sealed in shadow, waiting for the first real test. Late autumn brought thin cupboards and short tempers. The sawmill spoke of cordwood shortages, and Edward Harlow found his opening.
I'll wager a full cord of good fir that his double roof caves before Christmas. Who's fool enough to bet against me?
Let him gamble. This roof isn't built to win bets.
Joshua arrived at the cabin with an armload of split pine, his breath clouding the air. He stopped at the door, surprised.
It's warm in here, warmer than my place, and I've got twice the stove.
The gap does what no solid wall can. Heat rising hits the inner roof, then meets still air instead of freezing wind.
Joshua climbed the ladder and pressed a hand into the space between the two ceilings. The air was motionless, like a blanket no wind could tear.
Moving air kills, still air saves. My brother taught me that.
A low pressure rolled in from the north, and the first warning snow began to fall. Small flakes that clung to the roof like whispered threats.
The real blizzard is still out there, but this roof will be ready.
The storm arrived with a howl, but inside David's cabin, the air was dead calm. No cold seeped through the ceiling.
Not a whisper of wind. The gap held just like Thomas said it would.
Across the valley, Edward Harlow climbed into his attic and found a shingle torn loose, snow dusting through the opening.
Blasted roof. I had it patched in autumn. That wind found every weak spot.
David checked his own work before the cold could set again. He crawled into the air gap with a lantern.
This bracket's pulling loose. If it gives, the outer roof could peel right off.
He drove fresh spikes and pounded wedges into the plank, then double-checked every seam. By midday, Joshua arrived with word from town. The telegraph warned of a monster blizzard sweeping in from the north.
First, the small storm was a warning. Now the real test comes for everything I built.
The sky turned to cold iron, and the wind began to keen, the kind of sound that promised a night no one would forget. Edward went from door to door, warning anyone who would listen.
That hat he built will tear off in the blow and bring the roof below with it. He's putting us all at risk.
By afternoon, 3 men stood outside David's cabin, urging him to dismantle the second roof before the blizzard hit.
This roof stays. It's built on something you don't understand, and I won't pull it down for your fears.
When the men left, Joshua closed the door and turned to David. The firelight flickered across his face.
They're scared, David, but so am I. What makes this roof worth dying for?
My brother Thomas died in a room just like this one. Not from the cold alone, from the ice dams that backed up the eaves and the wind that followed the cracks.
He described a night where frozen meltwater filled the attic, and the slightest winter breath turned the room into a tomb.
A layer of still air above them would have saved him. I am building what he never had.
They spent the remaining daylight sealing vents, stacking firewood, and checking every spike. The cabin felt like a held breath.
Reeves, last chance. Come to my house before that hat tears off and kills you.
I am staying. This roof will hold.
I am staying with him. Save your worry, Edward.
Edward turned away, without another word, disappearing into the swirling snow. A violent gust slammed the cabin, and a sharp crack split the air, something splintering on the outer roof.
That's a board gone. I've got to fix it now.
He climbed onto the roof in the screaming wind, fighting to catch the flapping plank before it tore free completely.
Lose this board, and the outer skin could peel. The gap will be a wind tunnel.
He hammered nails through the plank, then lashed it with rope. The wind ripped at his sleeves, but he didn't stop until it held. Back inside, the fire was low, but the inner roof remained dry. Outside, the sky had turned to a black wall, and the real storm was just beginning. David climbed back into the air gap with a lantern, pressing a strip of canvas into the last remaining seam. Not a total seal. He left a finger-wide vent for moisture.
Still air doesn't mean dead air. If we seal it completely, sweat builds up, then freezes. That's what killed Thomas's attic.
You remember every lesson he taught you, don't you? What were his last words to you?
He said, "Davy, don't chase the cold. Build a wall where it can't follow." I didn't understand then.
He stared at the photograph until the edges blurred, then tucked it back inside his coat, close to his ribs. The first true blast struck the cabin like a battering ram. Snow lashed the windows, and the rafters groaned.
There it is. No more warnings.
No more warnings. Now the roof has to do its work.
Within minutes, the snowfall became a solid sheet of white, piling against the door faster than any shovel could clear.
It's just the storm now. The gap, the wood, the still air, they're all that stand between us and what took Thomas.
A deafening crack split the air above them, a support beam snapping under the blizzard's weight.
The main crossbeam's gone. If the outer roof sags, it'll crush the inner skin and flood the gap.
He grabbed a 2x4 and a coil of rope, then climbed into the access hatch, vanishing into the howling dark. The wind nearly tore him from the ladder. He wedged the board against the sagging beam, the frame shuddering.
One wrong move, and this beam will spear me. Hold, for Thomas's sake.
He lashed the board in place with rope. The storm screamed around him, but the brace stood firm.
You are bleeding. And you nearly went over. Another foot, and you'd have been swept away.
It'll hold for now. That's all that matters. We're not finished yet.
Inside, they listened to the roof groan above them. The brace strained, but the inner ceiling remained dry.
Still air is the only wall wind can't find, Thomas. I am counting on that.
The snow on the outer roof piled deeper on one side, throwing off the balance. The brace held, but the frame began to bow.
That drift will snap the beams in an hour. We have to clear it.
They tied a rope between them and climbed onto the roof. The wind was a solid wall, and the snow cut like shards of glass.
Keep low. One slip, and we both go over.
Joshua's glove tore away on a nail. For a full minute, he swung the shovel with bare flesh against the wind, and his fingers turned white. They heaved the last load of snow off the edge. The frame creaked, then settled. The roof was light again. They stumbled back inside. Joshua's fingers were dead white. David's face was gray, his lips blue.
David, sit down. You are freezing. Your hands are as bad as mine.
David collapsed beside the dying fire, his body shaking. The photograph slipped from his pocket and landed in the ash. Joshua wrapped his frost-bitten hand in a blanket and tucked the photo back into David's coat. Neither man could feel their own skin. Joshua, shivering with his bandaged hand, tilted his head back toward the inner ceiling. No water stains, the wood was bone dry.
Not a drop. The gap buried every draft before it could touch us.
At the Harlow house, Edward climbed into the attic with a lantern and found water pouring through the ceiling joists.
Martha, the floor's soaked. Get every bucket. The ice dams are flooding us out.
Joshua managed to feed a few sticks into the fire and lifted a cup of water to David's lips. After a long pause, David's eyes flickered open.
The ceiling, is it dry?
Not a leak. The gap held.
David tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out. He lay staring at the timber above, a thin smile crossing his cracked lips.
Thomas, we built a wall wind can't find. The storm hasn't won yet.
But outside, the blizzard still raged, and across the valley, Edward's roof was caving under the weight of ice and frozen grief. Joshua stared at the darkening peaks of snow building along the outer eaves. The drift was growing again, faster than before.
I'll go. You can't lift a shovel, David. Not again.
No, Joshua. Your hand, you'll lose fingers.
I'd rather lose a few fingers than sit here and wait for that roof to bury us.
He climbed out alone. The wind nearly flattened him, but he began to throw snow into the white blur, his bandaged hand numb. When he crawled back inside, his face was raw, his bandaged hand frozen solid. He collapsed next to David without a word. Down in the valley, Edward Harlow heard a crash. The north attic window had blown in, and a surge of snow and ice poured across the floor.
Martha, get away from the stairs. The whole south wall could go next.
Then, without warning, the wind shifted. The howl dropped to a low moan, and for a few breaths, the blizzard loosened its grip.
This is it. The lull. If the roof holds through this, maybe it will hold through anything.
Through the thinning snow, two figures staggered toward the cabin. Edward Harlow, dragging his wife Martha, behind him.
Reeves, let us in. The house is flooding. We can't stay.
Get inside, quickly.
Edward stumbled over the threshold, then froze. The air was warm and still. No water dripped, no ice cracked.
Your roof, it's holding? Everything stays dry?
The gap stops the heat from reaching the outer skin. No melt, no ice dams.
Edward stared at the underside of the inner roof, then at the tooled seams, as if seeing a new language.
He's starting to realize. This isn't a hat, it's a fortress.
Outside, the wind began to sharpen again. The lull was ending, and the last wave of the blizzard was gathering.
One more push. If the roof survives this final assault, maybe the town will finally listen.
The wind returned with a howl that shook the cabin to its foundation, and a long screech of nails giving way tore across the roof.
The outer boarding is ripping off. We need lines over the peak. Rope the whole skin down.
I'll do it. Let me pay part of my debt.
Joshua grabbed the last coil of rope, and the three of them pushed out into the screaming white. On the roof, the gale nearly flattened them, but they heaved the rope across the ridge, inch by inch.
Pull, Edward. Now, haul it tight.
The rope caught, cinching the outer planks against the frame. The shuddering eased. They staggered back inside, their faces ghost white, their fingers frozen around the rope burn. Then the wind began to lose its edge, the shriek fading to a low moan, as if the storm had spent its fury.
It's holding. The gap is still dead air. Thomas, we made it.
By first light, the blizzard had spent itself. The valley lay silent under a fresh blanket of white, and the cabin stood untouched. Inside, every face was lined with frost and exhaustion, but the inner ceiling was bone dry, and the dying fire still threw warmth. Edward pushed open the door and stared across the valley. His own house had collapsed into a jagged ruin of ice and splintered pine.
It's gone. Martha, the whole second floor is crushed.
He turned back toward David, who stood propped in the cabin doorway, his hands wrapped in strips of blanket.
Reeves, I called it a hat, called you a fool. That air gap saved our lives.
It saved us. But we paid for it. Joshua's hand may never be the same.
Joshua lifted his bandaged hand and gave a weak grin. The fight had left its mark on all of them.
It'll heal. The roof didn't leak, That's what matters.
For a long moment, no one spoke. The hate that had lived in Edward's eyes for months had finally been replaced by something quieter. Word spread through the valley. By mid-morning, a crowd had formed outside the cabin, staring at the untouched double roof and the ruins on the other hill.
Tell them, Reeves. Show them how your roof stood when mine fell.
Look at the eaves. No ice dams, no water stains. The secret is between the roofs.
He led them to the access hatch and pointed into the dark band between the two ceilings. The air inside was motionless, still holding the night's warmth.
Heat rises from the stove and stops here, trapped by still air. The outer roof stays cold, so snow never melts and refreezes.
We burned half the fuel of a normal night, and the roof stayed dry through the worst of it. I saw it myself.
He built a shield with nothing but air. All this time, I was too proud to see it. Teach me, Reeves. When I rebuild, I want this gap. It may be the cheapest roof we've ever had, but it's the only one that held.
A murmur rippled through the gathered men and women. Not mockery this time, but the first quiet notes of understanding. David pulled a folded sketch from his coat, Thomas's old drawing, and spread it on the table. The lesson had finally found more ears.
Look at my eaves, a solid foot of ice. Reeves' roof has none. That gap stopped the melt.
Snow stays frozen on the outer skin because no heat escapes. No melt, no ice dams. Ever.
I laughed at this man. I bet against his life, and he saved my family.
A murmur spread through the crowd. Not of doubt, but of dawning respect.
We used a third of the fuel, and it was warmer. The ceiling stayed dry.
The men looked at their own roofs, thick with frozen water, and began to understand.
Every house in this valley should have this gap. I'll rebuild mine to prove it.
It's not my secret. Any man with a hammer and extra planks can build it.
Edward offered his hand, and David took it. The hatred was gone. By sundown, 5 men had asked for the sketch. The air gap had become the simplest shield the valley ever owned. The next morning, David set his tools on the table beside Thomas's sketch. Edward Harlow arrived with his own hammer, ready to learn.
Show me the gap, Reeves. I want to understand it like you do. Not just the plan, the feel of it.
It's just a foot of dead air. Heat can't jump across it, so the cold never reaches your home.
They climbed onto the new frame of Edward's house, measuring the gap with a simple plank, marking the exact distance.
He's not the man who called it a hat. Something broke in that storm, and something better grew.
I owe you more than lumber, Reeves. You saved my family.
You owe nothing. This isn't about debt. It's about what my brother taught me.
By noon, 3 more men brought their own lumber. The double roof design was no longer a curiosity. It was becoming the valley's new foundation. David paused and looked at the photo still tucked in his pocket. The boy who froze in a drafty room had finally built his wall, and as the hammers echoed across the valley, the name Hat for a house died in everyone's throat. The crowd followed David and Edward to the wreck of the Harlow house, where frozen water hung from the eaves like glass teeth.
Ice dams form when heat leaks through a single roof, melting snow that refreezes at the edge. That water backs up under the shingles, but when the outer roof stays cold, because the gap keeps heat trapped, the snow never melts. No water, no dams.
This house proves it. I had the best single roof in town, and it flooded inside a day.
A collective murmur moved through the crowd, not of doubt, but of the heavy realization that they had all been building wrong.
It's not just about warmth. It's about stopping the cycle. Cold roofs don't make ice.
And a roof that doesn't make ice, doesn't rot, doesn't leak, doesn't kill.
The men looked at the ice dams on their own houses, then at David's clean eaves, and the truth settled like frost.
We'll build our new house this way, and every man in this valley should do the same.
The air gap had become more than a shield. It was the new architecture of survival. David reached into his coat and pulled out the worn photograph he had carried for 12 years.
This is Thomas. He was 12. We stuffed rags into every crack that winter, but the wind found the gaps. The ice dams backed up, and the attic froze solid. He died in my arms.
A silence fell over the crowd, the kind that only comes when a truth is too heavy to interrupt.
That's why he built the gap. To stop the same thing from happening to anyone else.
It was never a hat, Reeves. It's a shield. You built a shield with a dead boy's wisdom.
For the first time, Edward Harlow's voice cracked, and he bowed his head.
Thomas taught me that still air saves lives. His last words were, build a wall where it can't follow.
The crowd stood motionless, the cold forgotten. The gap, now more than wood and air. It was the smallest patch of stillness in the valley, and it had finally become a graveyard for guilt. On a morning when the frost hung thin, David walked alone to the small cemetery at the valley's edge. Carrying a piece of the outer roof, he knelt beside Thomas's simple cross and pressed the wood into the snow, a shard of the shell that had held the storm at bay.
I built the wall, Thomas. Just like you said.
Footsteps crunched behind him, but he didn't turn. He knew the gate.
He would have been proud, David.
David nodded, his eyes still on the marker, his hand resting on the frozen ground.
The gap stopped the ice. He'd have wanted that.
For a long while, they said nothing more. The silence was not empty. It was the stillness of something finished. When the sun broke low through the pines, the two men stood together against a cold that no longer held them, and the piece of the roof lay on the grave like a promise kept. By the time the snow melted and the first buds showed on the pines, the valley looked different. Every new roof carried the same gap, a dark stripe of dead air that had become a signature of survival. David stood on the ridge where he used to listen for storms and felt the warmth of the sun on his face. Joshua climbed the last rise and stopped beside him, his hand still bandaged but strong.
You changed everything. Every family in town has a double roof now.
I didn't change anything. Thomas taught me, and I just remembered.
They stood in silence, looking at the valley that had learned to keep the wind at bay. The gap was no longer a curiosity. It was a legacy, written in the space between every ceiling and every sky, and the man who built it no longer carried the weight of a frozen attic. He carried a quiet fire. The stillness he had given to others had finally found its way home. That evening, David stood inside the cabin, alone. The fire had burned low, but the air above him was still. He lifted his hand and pressed it flat against the inner ceiling, feeling the slight warmth that never escaped.
Still air. No wind. No drafts. Just warmth.
He closed his eyes and listened. No wind, no creaking, only the steady pulse of the fire below.
Thomas, I found the stillness. It was here all along.
The photograph of Thomas rested on the table, its edges soft from years of being touched. Outside, a late thaw wind rolled down the mountain, but inside, the air held fast. David smiled, a small, unguarded thing, and the cabin felt not like a shelter, but like peace. Above him, the dark gap kept its faithful watch, a silent, weightless shield of nothing but air. And in the quiet, the wind could do nothing but pass.